Hey, Shell Squad, what's happening? For those of you who don't know me, I'm Shelly Lawson, and I am a published author. This is my first book, A Change of Pace. I have 2 books out, but we'll get to that later. And I thought today I would share with you the first chapter of the book. And I'll read the blurb on the back, this right here, just so you get a feel of what it is. It says, this is volume 1 of the Copake Lake Mysteries series. It says, Samantha Palmer, a 25-year-old woman with a sense of adventure, travels across the country with her older brother from southern Texas to upstate New York to stay with relatives. What she finds there is the last thing on her mind, running into an old flame who leads her on a whirlwind journey into his past and that of his family. Will she be able to handle the huge helping of stress that's put on her plate by this perilous encounter? Okay, so that's the theme of the book. So without further ado, let's get into chapter 1. Shall we? Chapter 1. If all 3 of you get knocked out simultaneously, I may have to leave you for dead. Thus was my warning as my oldest 3 brothers struggled with my huge suitcases, their knees buckling at each step as they make their way toward the front door of our house. That wouldn't even be a danger if you hadn't packed an entire drugstore's worth of makeup, remarked Dylan, one of my younger brothers. Yeah, well, we can't all be as secure with our looks as you are. Anyway, my makeup happens to be in that bag, I mentioned matter-of-factly as I pointed at one of the bags that Marshall had swung over his shoulder. Suddenly, all progress stops short as my mother appears holding a tray of lemonade and cookies, resulting in the box I was carrying running straight into one of their behinds. Exasperated by the new box-shaped pit in my abdomen, I let out a deep groan. Sorry, sis, but I've been smelling those cookies and they just smell too good to pass up. Not to mention, she cut me off of dipping into the raw dough a while back. And if I hadn't, you wouldn't be enjoying the product of the baking process, now would you? My mother quipped back. On a side note, Sam, I'd be extra careful back there behind Nick. The term silent but deadly was coined with him in mind. Heck, when he was little, he practically didn't even need a stroller. He could just propel himself around with the power of methane. Dylan pointed at his slightly shorter twin, whose back I had run into. I was about to remind him that I had had ringside seats to that gaseous period when our brainy little sister Jillian walked in and interjected. Actually, the term silent but deadly was widely used in the 1950s, which, as you know, was decades before Nicholas was born. We know, Jilly, it was a joke, unlike our dear brother's stench problem. I made a face. Yeah, especially after the 3 bean and cheese tacos he inhaled for lunch. Marshall threw one of the mammoth-sized bags by the door and plopped onto the couch. Suddenly, a shrill scream came from the top of the stairs. Mommy! Growing up, the Palmer household was rarely quiet. With 7 children, our parents never had the chance for a quiet life. Marshall, who was destined to be a soccer player from the very start of life, was first to grace my parents with his presence. When he hit his terrible 2s, anything and everything that wasn't nailed down was fair game and was promptly kicked over and or stomped on as if it looked better that way, after which he would just stand there and grin as if he'd achieved a great accomplishment. Needless to say, my parents could not wait until he grew out of this phase. It was about this time that I came along. I was the completion of that perfectly even family of a mother and a father with one boy and one girl that graced the front of magazines at every supermarket. At this point, our family was very satisfied with the way life was. For quite a while, it was just the four of us living comfortably on our 8-acre piece of farmland. Once I got a little older, Marshall and I would spend hours exploring the property and imagining up things like turning an old septic tank we found in the bushes one day into a torpedo from World War II, or a rusty old yellow truck bed perched on top of 4 55-gallon drums into a 2-story bungalow. It was when I was 6 years old that my parents were blessed with another baby girl, Colleen Ray Palmer, weighing in at 6 pounds 13 ounces, and even at 19 she didn't weigh much more than that, having been blessed with a great figure and the ability to maintain it no matter what she ate, much to the annoyance of every girl she came in contact with throughout the years. Colleen was a typical girl from the very beginning. From an early age, she developed an interest in Barbies and play makeup, which consequently covered the floor of our bedroom we shared, much to my annoyance. And unlike our much younger sister, Marshall and I had been taught early on in life to keep our toys picked up, so when I stepped on Malibu Barbie's pink pump on the way to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I knew who to throw it at. 2 short years after Colleen was born came the twins, Nicholas and Dylan. By this time, my parents had grown fond of the idea of a big family and decided to add on to the house in preparation for even more children. They had no idea what they were up against with those two, as the boys were constantly up to something, especially now at the age of 17. Not to mention, I'm bad at reading, sorry. Not to mention the scrapes and bruises that those two alone accumulated had us going through Band-Aids like they were Skittles. It's even a running joke in our family. At any time someone visited, whether for dinner or for the weekend, the hostess gift was always the same: sport Band-Aids. A few years later, my dad was in a terrible accident that put him in the hospital for about a month, followed by a year of intensive physical therapy. My parents were afraid they might not get to have the Brady Bunch family they had imagined. Then one day, a few years later, can't read. After a routine checkup at the family doctor, my mother was shocked with the news of little Jillian's impending arrival. My parents were so overjoyed they held a block party that will be remembered for years to come. Of all of our family, Jillian has got to be the most unique. She was blessed with brains and brawn. She's the type that could be reading Jane Austen with one hand while hog-tying the dog with the other. 50% of her time is spent with her nose in a book, studying some subject that would give a college graduate a run for their money, and the other half out training Mr. Darcy, her most prized family member. I don't know what made my parents buy a horse, but I also wasn't dumb enough to look a gift horse in the mouth. Pardon the pun. Though my parents were quite aged by this time, their final production came as no surprise to anyone: baby Brian. Brian is significantly younger than the rest of us, so he revels in being passed around by the whole family and completely spoiled by all. An inside joke of our family is that there will be a huge parade at every major and minor event of his life, from his first potty to his funeral. And that sweet little boy is where the aforementioned holler came from. Unfortunately for my little brother, the oven timer for the cookies that my mom was baking had gone off at the same instant. Being that I was the only other person standing at the time, I was elected as the obvious choice to go and investigate. I didn't mind though, because I knew that my time with my baby brother was quickly fleeting, being that I was leaving in a few days. You see, I was going to be staying with my aunt and uncle in New York for a while, and I didn't know how long I was going to be staying, so naturally I relished the idea of spending a private moment with little Brian while I was still around. I bounded up the stairs to my little brother's room. It was supposed to be his nap time, so I had a suspicion that he had had a bad dream. When I entered the room and saw that he was sitting up in his bed, eyes red and watery, my heart leapt out to him. "What's the matter, Bri?" I asked as I snuggled under the covers beside him on his little twin bed. He crawled into my lap, raising his hands above his head, saying, "I dreamed that New York ate all of your socks and that you had nothing to wear on your feet to go running." "Really?" I said, squeezing him tight and urging him to go on. This seemed like one of those moments where you just want to pause time and stay in forever. Then a monster came along and you couldn't run because you didn't have socks on, and it ate you. I looked down at my little brother and smiled. "Well, you know what? I heard about those sock-eating monsters." "Really?" he said with a sniff, his eyes as big as saucers. "I sure did. Then I went out and bought a whole bunch of extra socks, so you don't have to worry about any trouble with them," I assured him in as serious a tone as I could muster. "Whew, that's a relief," he said, making a theatrical gesture of wiping his forehead. I seized the opportunity now that his arms were out to give him a little tickle. He giggled and wrapped his little arms around me so tight I thought I might cry from how wonderful this moment was. "You know what?" I said. "I think I might miss your big bear hugs most of all." After savoring the warm, fuzzy moment for a few more seconds, the smell of the fresh batch of cookies wafted in from the kitchen, resulting in a convulsive jarring from his squirming little body as he struggled with the covers. Once he was uncovered, all that was left was a little blur as he made his way toward the tantalizing treats. I stared headlong into the doorway of the little bedroom for a few moments longer before I crawled out of the tiny bed and made for the door myself. After such a touching moment, I couldn't help but think about how difficult it was going to be to leave my home and this loving, warm environment. But as much as I loved growing up with a big family and care for each of them dearly, I had felt that it was time for something different, something new and exciting. I wasn't sure what. I had spent countless hours throughout the past few weeks trying to think of something I could do to get away from the norm for a while. I had tried to come up with ideas before, and on many occasions could not come up with a single one. So I would just start doodling and get further away from my original purpose. Then last week, after I had spent about half an hour in my room racking my brain, Marshall knocked on my bedroom door, came in and plopped on my bed. "So how's the brainstorming coming?" "Pretty confusing. Maybe I can help." Marshall and I had always had a very close relationship. On some occasions, it almost seemed like we were reading each other's minds. So he had always been the first person I went to when something was bothering me, and tried his best to be there for me every time he could be. So, considering that I was going to be asking him for help eventually, I happily accepted his help. As soon as we got comfortable, I told him all about how I was feeling, bored and needing to get away from the norm for a while, and he listened and understood. A short time later, my mom came in with the phone saying it was for me. "Well, who is it?" I asked, my brows furrowed with curiosity. "It's your Aunt Beth. She wants to talk to you about something." Elizabeth Callum, or Beth as she is more affectionately known, is one of my favorite aunts. She and her husband, Uncle Joe, live way up in Hillsdale, New York, a small town on the northern side of the state. With a confused look on my face, I took the phone. Within seconds, Marshall had hopped off the bed and taken his leave, along with our mother, to give me some privacy. "Hello?" "Hi, honey, it's your Aunt Beth." "Hi, what's going on? How are Janine and Kim?" My uncle and aunt have 2 daughters, Janine and Kim, who are both very successful businesswomen in the city. "Oh, I suppose they're doing okay," she sighed. After a few moments, she went on. "Ever since they moved into that new apartment in the Upper East Side, I haven't heard from them very often. I guess that means they are enjoying themselves and their newfound independent state. And your Uncle Joe has been working on some new highly classified super secret project, leaving me to entertain myself most of the time. So I thought it might be nice to have someone come up and keep me company for a while. Would you like to come hang out with your old auntie?" "Oh, Beth, that's an awesome idea. That sounds like just what I need. Just give me a little while to talk to my parents. I will try to call you later tonight, and by the way, you are far from old." "Oh, how sweet. I knew I picked the right niece. Anyway, that sounds great, sweetheart. Look forward to hearing from you. I love you, and give my love to the rest of the family." "I will definitely do that. Bye." As soon as I'd hung up the phone, I got up and ran into the family room to tell my parents about my aunt's invitation. But of course, they already knew. I guess Beth had already asked their permission before talking to me. The rest of the afternoon was spent with half of the family going around and around trying to come up with a plan that suited everyone's needs. Finally, there was a consensus. I cannot speak. Since Marshall was the type of protective older brother that did not want his little sister getting lonely, or at least that was his explanation he came up with, but knowing him better, I knew that he just was looking for a break from work. He willingly offered to accompany me to ensure my safety. Then, after a brief discussion with our parents, it was decided that we would take the old family station wagon with us. The station wagon had been the family vehicle for a long time, until about a year ago, when my parents decided to buy an upgrade. The ensuing argument between all of the kids that were of driving age, and even some who were not, in the house made my parents decide that it would sit in the driveway until someone absolutely needed it. I would say that this definitely qualifies. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. As I mentioned, I will put a link to this book in the description. And that's all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this video. And I actually did have a winner for the other HelloFresh thing. I think the person's name was Rebecca. So, congratulations, Rebecca. And I will see you guys Friday. Bye.